Breaking tonight, Donald Trump just did something nobody saw coming. The man who threatened 25% tariffs on Canada, who broke off trade talks over a hockey game advertisement, who called our prime minister weak, just endorsed Mark Carney's deal with Beijing. Let that sink in for a moment. The same president who's built his entire political career on demonizing China, who's threatened to blow up North American trade over Chinese electric vehicles, just shrugged and said Carney's Beijing agreement made sense. What happened? Did Trump suddenly become reasonable? Did he forget about his China obsession? Or did Mark Carney just execute the most sophisticated piece of strategic diplomacy Canada has attempted in decades? Because here's what the American media isn't telling you tonight. Here's what the think tanks in Washington are only starting to whisper about in private. This wasn't just a trade deal. This was a geopolitical stress test that Canada just passed with flying colors. And the results are now sitting on Donald Trump's desk showing him exactly what's possible. Thursday afternoon, White House press room. Someone asked Trump about the Canada-China deal. You can feel it in that room. Everyone's bracing for impact. The reporter who asked the question is probably already regretting it. His colleagues are reaching for their phones, ready to live tweet the meltdown. They know what's coming. The explosion. The threats. The all-caps Truth Social post that'll crash the internet for the next 3 days. Instead, Trump barely looks up. Well, that's okay. That's what you should be doing. I mean, it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that, right? Translation. Mark Carney just did something Trump himself wants to do, but hasn't figured out how to accomplish yet. And what happened next reveals exactly why Canadian strategic thinking is light years ahead of the chaos consuming Washington right now. Dear viewers, let me take you back to when this deal was being negotiated. Mark Carney's team flies to Beijing knowing 3 things with absolute certainty. First, a deal is possible. The framework has been publicly discussed for over a year. Both sides want this. Second, the auto industry and Doug Ford cannot be alienated. Ontario's manufacturing base is non-negotiable. Third, and this is the critical part everyone's missing tonight, the Canada-US-Mexico agreement comes up for renewal later this year. One wrong move, one perceived slight, and Trump could blow up North American trade out of spite. So Carney's team faces an impossible calculation. How do you prove Canadian independence without provoking American retaliation? How do you deal with China when Washington spent 5 years calling Beijing the enemy? How do you get better access to the world's second largest economy while the guy next door is threatening 25% tariffs because you looked at him wrong? Most countries would pick one. Carney needed all 3. The answer, you design a deal so strategically limited, so carefully calibrated, that it becomes more valuable to Trump as a reference point than it is threatening as a provocation. 49,000 electric vehicles. That's the number Carney agreed to, not unlimited access, not even a significant percentage of Canada's market. 49,000 EVs, representing roughly 3% of all vehicles sold in this country annually. Lower tariffs on canola, but not eliminated. Improved market access, but not revolutionary transformation. On paper, it looks almost cautious, conservative even. The kind of deal that makes progressive activists wonder if Carney went soft, if he capitulated to American pressure before the negotiation even started. But that's exactly what makes this brilliant. Goldie Hyder, president of the Business Council of Canada, told reporters the guidance to Carney's team was simple. Do no harm to the review and renewal of USMCA. We can't be seen to be abandoning North America and moving on to some other pastures. Everyone heard that as a warning, as a limitation on Canadian ambition. But listen to what Hyder's really saying. The instruction wasn't, don't make a deal with China. It was, don't make a deal that America can credibly claim threatens North American integration. There's a massive difference between those 2 positions, and Mark Carney understood it perfectly. Jim Thorne, chief market strategist at Wellington Altus, saw it immediately. Carney is testing where that red line is, he told CBC News. But then he said something even more important. I look at the Canada-China deal as a litmus test that the Americans are looking at. Translation, Canada just became the guinea pig for US-China détente, and we're getting paid for the privilege. Think about Trump's position right now. He's facing the same problem every American president has faced for the last 4 years. China is too big to ignore, too important economically to completely decouple from, but politically toxic to engage with directly. So what does Trump need? He needs someone to go first. He needs a friendly country to test the waters, to figure out what kind of limited engagement Beijing will accept, to map out where the actual red lines are versus where the rhetorical red lines get drawn. And Canada, professional, careful, strategically sophisticated Canada, just volunteered to be that test case. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer called the deal problematic for Canada on Friday morning. He told CNBC there's a reason America doesn't sell Chinese cars, citing tariffs that protect American auto workers. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy predicted Canada would regret bringing Chinese vehicles into our market. But here's what's fascinating. Read those statements carefully. Notice what they're not saying. They're not threatening retaliation. They're not announcing counter tariffs. They're not breaking off USMCA negotiations. They're issuing what Greer himself called a few obligatory hostile statements. And then moving on. Greer actually said on the record, "I don't expect that to disrupt American supply into Canada. Those cars are going to Canada. They're not coming here." Translation. This deal doesn't threaten American interests enough to warrant a real response. Carl Shimada, chief market strategist at Corpay, nailed the dynamics perfectly. The Trump administration has already taken the U.S. out of the running in electric vehicles and has not identified agricultural products as a major strategic priority. In other words, Carney picked the two sectors where America has already conceded ground. EVs, where Trump just killed the American industry's future with his anti-green energy policies. And agriculture, where canola isn't a strategic priority for Washington. But Shimada went further. It is possible that this agreement was approved through back channels with the administration, meaning that other than issuing a few obligatory hostile statements, U.S. officials simply ignore this development. Now we're getting somewhere. Dear viewers, between the moment Carney's team started serious negotiations with Beijing and the moment Trump endorsed the final deal, something extraordinary happened in North American diplomatic relationships. Canada stopped asking for permission and started demonstrating capability. For decades, the pattern was identical. Canada wants to diversify trade relationships. America objects. Canada backs down. Repeat indefinitely. But this time, something changed. This time, Canada went to Beijing, negotiated a limited but real agreement, announced it to the world, and then waited to see how Washington would react. And Washington, after the obligatory public grumbling, essentially said, "Interesting. Tell us what you learned." This is the part the American media completely missed when they framed the deal as Canada breaking from the United States. They saw divergence where the real story is strategic alignment on Canada's terms. Because here's what happens next. Trump is going to China. Everyone knows this. The question is what kind of deal he's trying to secure, and now he has a roadmap. He knows Beijing will accept limited EV access. He knows agricultural tariffs can be reduced without being eliminated. He knows what a safe deal looks like, one that doesn't trigger domestic political backlash while still providing tangible benefits. Goldie Hyder saw this coming. The U.S. president is going to China. Will he come back with something similar on cars? It wouldn't surprise me one bit. Canada just wrote the playbook Trump's going to use. And in exchange for that service, we got something Washington can never take away. Proof that Canadian sovereignty is not negotiable, even with a partner as powerful and unpredictable as the United States. This is where the story gets really interesting, because what we're watching isn't just one trade deal. It's the emergence of a completely new approach to Canadian foreign policy. Call it the Carney Doctrine. Strategic sovereignty through careful calibration. It works like this. Identify areas where Canadian interests diverge from American priorities. Find the minimum viable engagement that serves Canadian needs without triggering maximum American opposition. Execute quickly, announce confidently, and let Washington adapt to the new reality. The genius is in the limitation. By keeping the deal small enough to be defensible, Carney made it impossible for Trump to claim existential threat. But by making it real enough to matter, he established that Canada will pursue independent relationships regardless of American preferences. This is sophisticated statecraft that Canada hasn't attempted in generations, and the fact that it worked, that Trump endorsed it, that American officials are essentially shrugging and moving on, tells you everything about how dramatically the power dynamics in North America are shifting. But we need to talk about one more thing tonight, because there's a warning buried in this story that Canadians cannot afford to ignore. Remember what happened with that Ontario government anti-tariff advertisement during the World Series? Trump initially shrugged it off. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also, he said. 2 days later, he claimed the ad fraudulently reused Ronald Reagan footage and broke off all trade talks with Ottawa. The lesson? Trump's initial reaction means nothing. His actual position reveals itself over days and weeks, not hours. So yes, tonight we can celebrate that Trump endorsed the China deal. We can analyze the strategic brilliance of Carney's approach. We can recognize that Canada just demonstrated a level of diplomatic sophistication that surprises even our closest allies. But we also need to stay vigilant, because the president who endorses your deal on Thursday is the same president who might blow up USMCA negotiations on Monday because he saw something on cable news that made him angry. Here's what I want you to understand as we close tonight. This China deal isn't primarily about electric vehicles or canola. It's about Canada announcing to the world that we're done asking permission to pursue our own interests. For too long, Canadian foreign policy has been constrained by one question: what will Washington think? That question turned us into a junior partner, a satellite state, a country that had sovereignty on paper, but rarely exercised it in practice. Mark Carney just changed that calculation. Not by confronting America directly, not by declaring independence through grand gestures, but by quietly demonstrating that Canada can navigate complex geopolitical relationships without American approval. And the fact that Trump endorsed this approach, whether he fully understands what he's endorsing or not, gives Canada something priceless: precedent. The next time we want to pursue an independent relationship with a country America disapproves of, we can point to the China deal. We can show that strategic limited engagement doesn't threaten North American integration. We can prove that Canadian sovereignty and continental partnership aren't mutually exclusive. That's the real victory here. Not the 49,000 electric vehicles or the reduced canola tariffs, but the establishment of a new principle. Canada decides Canadian interests, and America will adapt. This is what the transition from dependence to resilience looks like in practice. Not revolutionary, not confrontational, just competent, strategic, and ultimately successful. The question now is whether Carney and his people realize what they just pulled off, and whether they're ready to do it again, because if this is the template, if this is how Canada plans to handle the next 10 years of American chaos, we might be watching the biggest shift in Canadian foreign policy since Pierre Trudeau walked into Beijing in 1973 and shocked the world. And unlike that opening, which was mostly symbolic, this one comes with American approval. And unlike that opening, which was largely symbolic, this one comes with American endorsement. That's not just surprising, that's transformational. Welcome to the new era of Canadian sovereignty. It's going to be quite a ride.